The storm winds howled across the North Atlantic as Captain Mayachin stood on the bridge of the cargo vessel Northern Star, her weathered hands gripping the wheel. 20 years at sea had taught her to read the ocean's moods, and tonight something felt wrong. The crew below deck whispered in hushed tones, casting suspicious glances her way. "Evening, Captain," First Mate Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "The men are getting restless with this weather." "I noticed," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady. "Storms got everyone on edge." She continued her inspection rounds, boots echoing on the metal deck plates as she descended into the cargo hold. The familiar sounds of a working ship filled the air, creaking hull, humming engines, distant conversations. But underneath it all was a tension that made her skin crawl, like the calm before a hurricane. In the mess hall, dozens of crew members sat at long tables, their evening meal growing cold as they huddled in small groups. Maya positioned herself near the entrance, watching. She'd sailed with dangerous men before, smugglers and pirates who'd taught her to fight dirty in the ports of Southeast Asia. Her instincts screamed danger. The first sign came when Engineer Kowalski suddenly stood, shoving his plate across the table. "This food is garbage," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Another crew member rose, then another. Plates clattered to the floor. Maya's hand moved to her radio, but before she could call the engine room, chaos erupted. Tables overturned with tremendous crashes. Metal utensils became projectiles flying through the air. The crew surged forward in coordinated groups, overwhelming the security officers stationed at the doors. The ship's alarm began to wail, its piercing shriek adding to the mayhem. "Mayday! Mayday! Mutiny in the mess hall!" Maya shouted into her radio, backing toward the nearest hatch. She saw Rodriguez across the room trying to maintain order as crew members streamed past him into the corridors. A deckhand charged at her and she sidestepped, using his momentum to slam him into the bulkhead. Another came from behind. She felt hands grabbing at her uniform. She drove her elbow back hard, connecting with ribs, hearing a grunt of pain. The mutiny was spreading fast. Through the portholes, she could see crew members flooding onto the deck. The few loyal officers were assembling, but they were vastly outnumbered. The rebellion had been carefully planned, timed to catch them during the night watch. Maya fought her way toward the hatch, using every technique she'd learned in Bangkok's underground fighting circuits to stay on her feet. A mutineer swung a wrench at her head. She ducked, the tool whistling past her ear to spark off the steel wall. Her counterpunch caught him in the solar plexus, doubling him over, but there were too many. Rough hands seized her arms, her legs, lifting her off the deck despite her struggles. The mob carried her like a trophy through the ship's corridors, their shouts echoing off the metal walls. "You're finished, Captain," someone yelled. "This ship belongs to us now." They hauled her to the engine room, where the heat was stifling and the massive diesel engines thundered with mechanical fury. The mob formed a tight circle around her, their faces lit by the red glow of warning lights. She counted faces, memorized positions, noted which ones seemed eager for violence and which ones held back. "Use your brain, Kowalski," Rico Martinez sneered, gesturing at Maya. "We've got ourselves a hostage. That's leverage when the Coast Guard shows up, but not if you animals can't control yourselves." Kowalski stepped closer, his boots inches from Maya's knee. "Since when do you call the shots, Martinez?" The big engineer was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The mob's bloodlust was rising, drowning out any thoughts of strategy or leverage. "You idiots want to throw away our best bargaining chip?" Martinez shouted, trying to reassert control. "The authorities will be here soon. We need something to negotiate with." Plenty of other officers got caught in the mutiny, Kowalski countered, moving behind Maya. "Don't need this one alive to bargain with." His rough hands seized her shoulders, fingers digging in painfully. The crew members holding her sides tightened their grip, expecting her to struggle. Instead, Maya went completely still. In one fluid motion, she trapped Kowalski's wrist against her shoulder, twisting her body sharply. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the engine room like a gunshot. Kowalski's scream came a heartbeat later, high-pitched and animal-like. The sound silenced the mob instantly. The big engineer stumbled backward, clutching his mangled wrist to his chest. His face had gone pale, mouth hanging open in shock. "Anyone else want to test me?" Maya's voice was calm, controlled, like a thin veneer over something much more dangerous. Martinez stepped forward, but carefully maintained his distance. Okay, everyone calm down." He raised his hands, trying to regain control of the situation. "Nobody else needs to get hurt here." His eyes fixed on Maya with new respect and calculation. "But we still can't let you run free, Captain. You understand that, right?" Maya met his gaze steadily. She could read the shifting dynamics in his expression. He was already rethinking his strategy, recognizing she wasn't the easy target they'd expected. 2 crew members half-dragged, half-pushed Maya into a small storage compartment, their grip rough but noticeably more careful than before. The metal walls pressed close, making the space feel like a coffin. They shoved her down onto a pile of canvas tarps that reeked of diesel fuel and despair. "Stay put," one growled, though his voice wavered slightly. Hours passed in the cramped compartment. Maya could hear the mutineers arguing outside, their plans already starting to fracture. She'd survived worse than this in the shipping yards of Manila, where showing weakness meant death. The crew thought being a woman made her vulnerable. They were learning otherwise. Martinez appeared at the compartment door, his face grim. "Listen, Captain. Some of the boys want to settle scores. I'm trying to keep them in line, but my influence only goes so far." "Smart of you," Maya replied. "A dead captain means the Coast Guard will hunt you to the ends of the earth. But a living hostage? That's your ticket to a prison cell instead of the bottom of the ocean." Martinez's eyes narrowed. She could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he looked at Kowalski's followers with new suspicion. The division she'd highlighted was already there. She just had to make it impossible to ignore. "She's right about one thing," Martinez said slowly. "A dead captain means we lose any chance of negotiating our way out of this." "Negotiating?" Another voice scoffed. "Since when are you in charge of negotiations, Rico?" "Since I'm the only one thinking beyond the next 5 minutes," Martinez snapped back. Maya smiled grimly. In less than 10 minutes, she'd managed to drive a deeper wedge between the mutineers' factions and secure her own survival. For now, the smile stayed on her face, knowing she'd just played them all against each other like pieces on a chessboard. The real question was, how long could she keep them fighting each other instead of her? But her satisfaction was short-lived. Late that night, as most of the crew slept off their revolutionary fervor, she overheard a whispered conversation that chilled her blood. "Forget Martinez and his politics," a gravelly voice said. She recognized it as Hawk Morrison, the ship's former bosun, a man with dead eyes and scars that spoke of violence. "We stick to the original plan. Scuttle the ship in international waters, make it look like an accident. The insurance money gets split between us." "What about the captain?" another voice asked. "She's seen too much already," Morrison said dismissively. "When we're ready to move, she becomes a loose end. You can handle that part, Diesel." "Been looking forward to it," came the dark chuckle. Maya forced herself to stay still even as her pulse quickened. She knew Morrison's reputation from their previous voyages. He wasn't just another disgruntled sailor. He was methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless. This wasn't about working conditions or pay disputes, this was about insurance fraud and murder. A young deckhand appeared at her compartment, holding out a water bottle. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said nervously. "One of Martinez's people, probably sent to keep their hostage alive." "Thanks," Maya said quietly, accepting the bottle through the gap. She studied him, barely 20, still soft around the edges. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he replied, shifting nervously. "Tommy Santos." "Listen, Tommy," she kept her voice low, gentle. "When this is over, there's going to be an investigation. Coast Guard, FBI, maybe even international maritime courts. The ones who live through this will be the ones who chose the right side." Tommy's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing as he hurried away. Maya spent the next few hours studying her surroundings and the crew's patterns. Morrison commanded respect through fear, but she'd noticed how other crew members tensed whenever he walked past. There was history there, bad blood that could be useful. But approaching the right people would be tricky. A fight broke out near the bridge, bigger this time. Martinez cursed and hurried over to restore order. Other crew members gravitated toward the commotion, drawn by the prospect of violence. This was her chance. She spotted Chief Petty Officer Williams standing alone by the radio equipment, looking conflicted. Williams was old-school Navy, a man who understood chains of command and honor. "Williams," she called softly. "We need to talk." The grizzled sailor looked around nervously before approaching her compartment. "Captain, this isn't how I wanted things to go." "Morrison has his crew," Maya said quickly. "Diesel, Martinez, at least 6 others. What exactly do you think you and the handful of loyal crew could do against those odds?" "You know these men," Maya continued. "Their weaknesses, their rivalries. I know how to survive in situations like this. Together, we could tear their plan apart piece by piece." Williams studied her face. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," Maya replied honestly. "But when Morrison's ready to scuttle this ship with everyone on it, trusting me might be the only thing that keeps you breathing." Williams was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" The next few hours were crucial. Maya worked through Williams to identify crew members who were having second thoughts about the mutiny. Not everyone had signed up for insurance fraud and murder. Some just wanted better working conditions and had gotten swept up in Morrison's rhetoric. Fire in the galley, someone shouted, breaking through her planning. All hands. Fire in the galley. Martinez appeared at her compartment, keys in hand. We need every person to fight this fire, he said grimly. Including you. Don't try anything stupid. Maya nodded. Ship goes down, we all go down with it. Martinez hesitated, then unlocked the compartment. Maya kept her expression neutral as Williams grabbed her arm, leading her toward the galley. His grip was firm but not brutal, just enough to look convincing to watching eyes. The galley was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning grease. Several crew members worked frantically with fire extinguishers while others formed a bucket brigade. In the chaos, Maya caught Williams' eye and nodded toward a side passage. They slipped away from the firefighting efforts, moving through the ship's maze of corridors toward the engine room. But they weren't alone. Two of Morrison's men had been watching, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The first attacker came around the corner swinging a pipe wrench. Maya ducked under his swing and drove her fist into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping, she brought her knee up into his face. The wet crunch of breaking cartilage echoed through the narrow passage. Williams was struggling with the second man, a wiry deckhand with a shiv. The smaller man was quick, but Williams had experience. He managed to trap the knife hand against the bulkhead, then drove his elbow into the attacker's temple. The deckhand crumpled to the deck, unconscious. Nice work, Maya breathed, checking their assailants for serious injuries. Both men would live, but they'd be out of action for a while. The fight had lasted less than a minute, but Maya knew she'd crossed a line. There would be no more pretending to be just another captive caught in the mutiny. She'd shown her true face, the street fighter, the survivor. And on a ship like this, that kind of reputation brought its own dangers. The night wrapped the Northern Star in darkness, broken only by the dim running lights that cast an eerie glow through the fog. Most of the crew had settled into an uneasy sleep, their snores and occasional mutters echoing through the metal corridors. Maya had managed to reach the ship's communication array without being detected. Working quickly in the darkness, she began manipulating the radio beacon, creating a pattern that any experienced maritime officer would recognize. Short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. The universal distress signal, SOS, over and over. She repeated the pattern, praying someone at the Coast Guard station was monitoring the frequencies. A noise below made her freeze. Footsteps. She quickly secured the wires to maintain the signal pattern and melted back into the shadows. Williams appeared, moving carefully through the darkness. Captain? The fire's out, but Morrison's getting suspicious. He knows someone helped you get away. Maya nodded grimly. How long until the Coast Guard responds to our signal? If they picked it up? Maybe 6 hours. But Morrison's planning to make his move at dawn. He wants to be in international waters before anyone can stop him. They returned to her hiding spot in the storage compartment, but Morrison was waiting for them. The bosun's scarred face twisted into a cruel smile as several of his men stepped out of the shadows, weapons in hand. Well, Morrison said slowly. Look what we have here. A conspiracy. Williams started to speak, but Morrison cut him off with a gesture. Save it, Chief. You made your choice. He turned to Maya, his cold eyes studying her like a predator sizing up prey. You've caused me a lot of trouble, Captain. Time to settle accounts. Rough hands forced Maya to her knees. Someone yanked her arms behind her back, binding them tight with rope. She could feel blood running from a split lip where one of Morrison's men had struck her. What worried her more was the calculating look in Morrison's eyes. Move, Morrison ordered, and they half-dragged, half-carried Maya through the ship's corridors toward the lower decks. Williams was hauled along behind her, his face grim but determined. They descended into the ship's engineering spaces, past massive pipes and electrical panels. Morrison led them to a section Maya had never seen before, where maintenance hatches opened onto narrow crawlways that ran beneath the ship's hull. These service tunnels connect to the seacocks, Morrison explained conversationally. Open the right valves, and this ship goes down fast. Coast Guard will find evidence of mechanical failure, maybe some crew member errors. Tragic accident. The tunnels were narrow and dark, lit only by Morrison's flashlight. Maya memorized each turn, left at the first junction, right past a cluster of pipes, straight toward the sound of rushing water. Above them, she could hear footsteps and equipment being moved. The Coast Guard would be preparing to board, unaware of the real danger lurking below. Morrison's crew worked efficiently, setting charges at critical points in the ship's structure. Maya counted at least 8 men, all armed, all committed to their plan. Williams caught her eye and nodded slightly. He was ready to fight when the moment came. A particularly loud noise from above made everyone freeze. They're preparing to board, Morrison said calmly. Right on schedule. Everyone in position. Maya saw her chance. You need someone small to access the forward seacocks, she said. The passage is too narrow for your men. Morrison studied the cramped opening they'd revealed, then looked at Maya with grudging respect. You're right. But if you try anything, where am I going to run? Maya asked reasonably. We're in the bottom of a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. Morrison nodded to his men, who began untying her bonds. The moment her hands were free, Maya struck. She grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby tool rack and swung it at the nearest guard's head. The man dropped like a stone. Williams erupted into action at the same moment, tackling another guard and sending them both sprawling into a maze of pipes. Gunshots rang out in the confined space, deafeningly loud. As Morrison's men opened fire, Maya dove for cover behind a massive water tank, bullets sparking off metal all around her. She could hear Williams cursing as he wrestled with one of the gunmen. Another explosion from the charges Morrison had set. The ship was starting to list, taking on water fast. Kill her. Morrison's voice echoed through the engineering space. Don't let her. The rest was drowned out by the sound of rushing water. The ship's hull had been breached in multiple places. Maya felt the deck tilting beneath her feet as tons of seawater poured into the lower compartments. She worked her way through the flooding spaces, using her knowledge of ship design to stay ahead of the rising water. Behind her, she could hear Morrison's men shouting orders, their carefully laid plans falling apart as the ship began its death spiral. An explosion rocked the vessel, throwing Maya against a bulkhead. Emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the engineering spaces into near-total darkness. She felt her way along pipes and cables, following the sound of voices toward Morrison's position. The bosun was directing his remaining men, trying to reach the lifeboats before the ship went under. Maya could see them in the dim light of an emergency lantern, loading equipment and supplies for their escape. She struck from the shadows, using a length of pipe to take down the first guard. The man screamed as the improvised weapon found his kneecap, sending him crashing into a control panel. Sparks flew as electrical systems shorted out. Morrison spun toward her, a pistol in his hand. You should have stayed dead, Captain. Maya rolled behind a generator as bullets chewed through the metal housing. When the firing stopped, she heard the telltale click of an empty magazine. She surged forward, pipe raised high. The bosun tried to reload, but Maya was already on him. The pipe caught him across the forearm, sending the pistol skittering across the wet deck. Morrison was tough, though years of shipboard brawls had made him dangerous even without weapons. He grabbed Maya's wrist, trying to wrestle the pipe away from her. They crashed into a bank of instruments, glass and metal flying as they fought for control. Morrison was stronger, but Maya was faster, using her lower center of gravity to stay on her feet. A knee to his ribs made Morrison grunt in pain. Maya twisted free and brought the pipe around in a vicious arc. Morrison barely got his arm up in time to block the strike, but the impact sent shockwaves through his bones. You're going down with this ship, he growled, throwing a haymaker that would have knocked her unconscious if it had connected. But Maya was already moving, ducking under the punch and driving her shoulder into his midsection. Morrison grabbed her throat with both hands, his grip like a vice. Maya's vision started to blur as oxygen was cut off. She could feel her strength ebbing, but desperation gave her one last burst of energy. She drove her knee up into Morrison's groin with everything she had left. The bosun doubled over with a strangled cry, his grip loosening. Maya broke free and brought the pipe down on the back of his skull. Morrison collapsed to the deck and didn't get up. Suddenly, bright lights cut through the darkness. Coast Guard. Everyone on the deck, hands where we can see them. Maya looked up to see armed officers rappelling through hatches, their tactical lights illuminating the flooded engineering space. Williams was there too, somehow having survived the chaos, helping to guide the rescue team to her position. Captain Chen, the team leader called out. We got your SOS. Are you injured? Maya shook her head, still breathing hard from the fight. Around her, Morrison's surviving crew members were being taken into custody, their dreams of easy money dissolved in the Atlantic waters. As dawn broke over the salvage operation, Maya stood on the deck of the Coast Guard cutter, watching as the Northern Star finally slipped beneath the waves. The ship she'd commanded for 3 years was gone, but she was alive, and the criminals who'd tried to destroy her were in custody. Hell of a thing, Chief Petty Officer Johnson said, joining her at the rail. I've been in maritime law enforcement for 20 years, seen plenty of mutinies and insurance scams, but I've never seen anything like what you did down there. Maya took a sip of coffee from the cup he'd handed her, welcoming its bitter warmth. Did what I had to do. No, Johnson shook his head. You did more than that. When we got your signal, we figured maybe you'd found a safe place to hide. Nobody expected to find you taking on armed criminals in a flooding ship. Maya was quiet for a long moment, remembering the violence, the fear, the old instincts that had risen to the surface like muscle memory. Nothing noble about it, she thought. Just survival. They thought being a woman made me weak, she said finally. Being a captain made me soft. They were wrong. Johnson nodded, understanding what she left unsaid. The streets of Manila and Bangkok had forged her long before she'd earned her master's license. The violence she'd survived in her youth had simply been waiting, dormant but ready, until circumstances demanded it rise again. The Northern Star was gone, but Captain Mayachin remained. Scarred, tested, but unbroken. In a world where showing weakness could mean death, she'd proven once again that survival sometimes required becoming something harder than the forces trying to destroy you.